Alright, welcome. Just brewing up a cup of coffee, so come on in. Um, it is, what is it, Friday. My cat is attempting to destroy the cords on my computer a little bit. And anyway, I guess I'll just jump in. Where did I leave off yesterday? I did do a little bit of sketching without, oops, a little bit of sketching last night without the camera on. Added a cuckoo bird down there. And did I do anything else? I worked on scales on this snake. I might have to revamp the snake. I'm not sure. Anyway, so I guess it's just time to jump on in. Where and what is it that I need to continue drawing? I am not sure. I need to boot up the camera on my Tiny Chat. So doing that now. Anyway, it's been kind of interesting. I listened to conference report today. Listened to Zombie Picture Show's video, watched an Earl video, and Professor Anton video. Went out to eat with my folks. They came by for a little bit before they went to pick up their granddaughter. And it was all, I don't know, a little bit inspirational. I have to admit, yes, I have to admit it. I'm trying to still figure out symbols for hell here. I'm moving into layers of kind of a symbolic layer, and then I'm going to move into a lusty layer, and then a burning layer, and then Satan at the bottom, and go that route. And so, I'm not really certain where to put the camera just yet, but yeah, I had some interesting discussion last night. I normally let the Tiny Chat go significantly longer than the videos play. I was going to try to record everything, absolutely, of the painting, but it's too draining on me to always stay cautious and always feel like I have to have something to say on a YouTube video. But yeah, Anton was going on talking about layers of consciousness, and I was thinking not so much about layers of consciousness as I was thinking about like undercurrents, currents and undercurrents, layers of currents of consciousness. And it's weird to even call them layers because it's more like, I like the word currents instead, because it's less about kind of like rational fabrics of layers that are applied to one another. He also uses the term irritability, which would be, you know, if your metaphor is like laying fabrics upon sand or different layers with different mediums and calling these different metaphors of these mediums consciousness. You know, I was thinking more about the metaphor of water and currents instead of layers, because the water, the particles of the water move from, you know, warm to cold, this direction to that direction, in and out, which then kind of led nicely into conference reports talking about woo. It was kind of interesting to hear him talk about woo, in that it was this, you know, a capturing of your consciousness, a lingering in one area, and then a release in another area. And I don't know, I like that idea because part of my notion of deconstructing the self has to do with allowing the mind, the conscious mind, to navigate um, in not just in contrarian mode where you're in contrast in moving in contra to everything that you think, but allowing a mode of being stuck on particular words or ideas or paradigms in this one area, and then having it release or ricochet into a multiplicity of meanings, having the meaning of a word flower into another area. And so that kind of came to mind. And I think of modern movies not being so artsy. Like a lot of modern movies, I don't think are very artistic. And um, I don't think that they're working very much on this woo poetics idea of setting up uh, analogies and words and characterizations that allow the mind to just kind of go into whatever other new arena of thought and consideration that they might go into, naturally speaking. Um, I'm trying to think of the girl with the dragon tattoo. That one seemed as if it had um, a lot of metaphor that could go into you could maneuver your thoughts about the person's motives and intent in a different way than maybe they intended, maybe than the producer intended you to go, and yet they left it that way. Kind of like The Shining in Room 237, as far as what the intent could possibly mean is always fascinating, because the authorial intent. I once did a lecture at Northern Arizona State in their communications department on authorial intent, and ultimately it came down to the idea that the author cannot predict the totality of their intent. They cannot portray and put forth the totality of their intent to the viewing public, because the viewer brings so much of their own conscious state and their own meaning to a piece. I just finished another large painting, and I had an old friend from my childhood and all the way up through college. I haven't been in very much contact with him, but he doesn't know my mystical outlook on things. But I took the last painting apart, which I still intend to do a video just on the meaning of that painting. And he liked it, I'm sure, for his own reasons. And then I ended up um, doing a legend for it, where I break down the symbolism in it in a way that made sense to me based on experiences that I've had. And I'm still waiting for his response to see how he will absorb my super fantastical, supernatural descriptions of events that have happened to me in an illustrative form, because he at one time, he has such a great memory, but he trusted his own memory as being closer to the truth than he grants to other people. And so we had a disagreement about a particular event that he wasn't even in attendance for, and I said that some particular thing happened during that time, and he was simply absolutely certain that it couldn't have happened the way I was describing it, to the point where he called me a liar, and that was upsetting to me. Um, Yeah, I also listened to Amendum and Anti-Bullshit Man discussion, and Amendum was, claiming that people that believe in God and fairies and magic and all that shit are lying, that they are lying, and that it's certainly not the case. And Anti-Bullshit Man takes on more of my view that each person is kind of, in a way, part of their consciousness is being in a node. You are in your own particular space of mind and being, and meaning and metaphor and rationality all form fit transparently from the environment and also from the individual outward and the individual to itself, formulate the consciousness that makes up the identity of the person. And um, yeah, what was I going to say about that? Yeah, just that the truth, my difference with Gary is that in my world, truth is both subjective and it's objective. It's shared at times and agreed upon, but there are instances and experiences that individuals have that are not shareable, hence they're not necessarily agreeable, but it doesn't mean that they're not true. And then you have the layer of true in that an individual may have truly a particular type of dream that has no ostensible, empirical base to it, and and yet I don't want to call it a truth in the objective sense, but more like it's not, nevertheless still a truth that the individual imagined it, that whatever the, if you want to get atomistic about it, then say that the particles of whatever made up their mind, whatever transition of chemicals moved through their mind in that kind of atomistic reductionary argument, form fit in a particular way as to allow that imagination to occur. And it's not to say that, in this respect, in this argument, it's not to say that imagination plays a role external to the skull in any way. Whoop! Kitty! Kitty, kitty, kitty! Oh, yeah, we got somebody in the room already. I didn't know that. Kronos. Hey, Kronos. Looks we had other folks in also. If you start typing, I'll respond to you. What's happening, kitty? You knocking down my plants, little kitty? You little feline, you? Yep. I do believe you do. I do believe you are. Anyway, so those were kind of some of the thoughts I was having listening to people. I listened to Zombie Picture Show, and Zombie Picture Show says if you're a theist, let me know what it is I have wrong. Feel free to put it in, because he wants to do more about theism, and he's obviously upset at some individual that is appealing to a form of logic and then breaching that form of logic, and doesn't witness themselves doing it. And he viewed whatever argumentation they were participating in as a type of defeat, as a kind of challenge. Gary always argues for we're in a state of gladiator war, and 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 syntax, one might say, are little warriors, and so whatever you say is in, when you put forth a proposition, especially if it's an argumentative proposition, you could say that you are playing into an arena that allows for defeat and championship to occur. But not all propositions and put forth statements have the intent of wanting to be be an arena or landing in an arena. I have to turn off my heater and get some coffee. I got a couple things. There is a feeling of awe argument. I'm reading from Tiny Chat now. There is a feeling of awe argument, form, complexity, the existence of complexity. Is an awe-inspiring as an unsayability of the name of God. I'm not certain what you're saying. Oh, it's kind of an awe-inspiring sensation that you can't speak of in the name of God. It may be. It may be. It's kind of the having a zest for life right when you wake up, or when you see a beautiful landscape or something catches you aesthetically. Is that awe inspiration? Is that awe inspiration a type of not an argument for God, but a good place to argue for God, to say God fits in. I'll be there in just a second to read what you're typing. See, I'm painting hell now, symbolically in a way in my painting, and so I wanted to do something that was akin to hellish behavior, which I figured was, well, drink a lot of coffee, maybe take a little alcohol into my system, not that I'm doing that right now, and then smoke cigarettes. So even though I quit cigarettes, I went and bought a pack to just kind of get it into my system here a little bit. Let's see, scientists can often talk about the awe in our scientific complexity, and we can no more describe that than we can talk about God in the theistic sense. Yeah, well, Kronos, I take a little bit different, I had some super radical experiences happen to me in the past that happened empirically, and in one case they were shared, meaning I shared the experience with a girlfriend at the time, and I used the fissure in reality, the non-scientific ability of the happening to point to something otherly and of another dimension or of a higher power. And I was awed by that, but I think I was awed by that differently than being awed by something that is empirically testable and agreed upon, like a scientific discovery that scientists might go through. They're awed by the complexity of something they see, where in fact a layman may not be able to see that complexity that they're experiencing. And but to say that the awe experience is an argument for God, I wouldn't say it's an argument for God, but you're saying sense, a theistic sense. And it's really weird to say, is awe that, but I don't disclaim that. I think that the very fact of waking up, the very fact of our being is, the atheist would say it's just a fact of our being, it's just a fact of our emotion or our capabilities. But to the theist, being and being awestruck can be something beautiful, and because it's considered absolutely amazing about how it could have possibly ever come about that one would be in that circumstance and be awed, they say that it is correlated to an ontology of being that in a way it's almost as if they're awed at the fact of being able to be awed, and they then put a transparency over the experience of saying that is godly, that is of God, that's a sense of God. And some people, I say, use that experience even lingually as to say, yes, this is, I can transpose and use correctly the word God and theological speech in description in concert with this experience. And so I don't say it's unappropriate to say a sense of God when one is odd, to start using language in that way, because that's how they sense it, that's how they feel it. And I think if you are a theist, then you probably believe to some extent that that is one of the manifestations of a higher power or of a God, that you are odd. We, we can't escape, I'm reading here, we can't escape what is called fantasy. We can totalize our life in third person. We can't escape what is called fantasy. We can totalize our life in third person. There is a demand for resolution that is not merely given in our sensibility. We can't escape what is called fantasy. Yeah, you're right. We can't escape what is called fantasy. I mean, there is imaginary realms of our thinking, and if you want to atomize that and say, well, our photons in our brain, produced a chemical reaction that allowed us to fantasize and imagine this particular arena of thought, then the molecules and the protons in physics did move in a fashion to allow that fantasization to occur. And we can't escape that by having a consciousness. But you also mentioned we can't totalize our life in third person. Well, I mean, because we're always in first person, but then we can shift. I say you can get to a point of disassociation, of separating yourself in a schizoid format, so that your habituation mentally is to see yourself in third person. I think that people do fall into that mental breakdown, that it is a breach and a mental breakdown that allows them to see themselves as closely as you might grant as possible, of their consciousness, seeing themselves as a third person moving at the same time that they are in their first person moving in a particular fashion. And then you go on to say, a demand for resolution, that this is not merely given in our sensibility. You say that is what Lacan calls a breach of symbolic and an experience of the real, or experience of oneself being the big other. Well, I'm not well versed with Lacan. I've I've only skimmed through his books to get a total idea, but I'll take your word for it, and just, regardless of the name drop, I can deal with the concept the best that I know how. I'm just moving cameras around here. Is what Lacan called the breach of the symbolic. It's interesting to call it the breach of symbolic, because I almost think you would have to take a whole series of symbolism of yourself in a third person and put it over there and still see it, almost like moving a subset, making all symbologic constructs a subset of some other symbol and putting it over there. But this subset notion is a metaphor for reasonability. It's a metaphor. It's trying to make a metaphor of consciousness by using set theory in my description, where you allow subsets to occur. But, like Anton says, he believes that there are layers of consciousness, but even to use the word layer as opposed to currents, it's just interesting that we have to use words in order to make descriptions, and even in order to make descriptions of fantastical things like the like consciousness. The breach of the symbolic via the intrusion of the real in a psychotic episode, to be clear. Yeah, well, I believe that in order to properly deconstruct yourself, you have to put yourself into a third person. you have to separate yourself from yourself, whether it's a subset of one or another, the big other, as you put it. The breach of the symbolic via an intrusion of the real is a psychotic episode. See, I would reverse that. I would say that the breach of the real via an intrusion of the symbolic is a psychotic episode. That's how I would state it. It seems more appropriate to state it that way, to me, because the intrusion of the symbolic allows multiplicity of meaning ricochets and flowering to occur in what conference reports referring to as woo poetics, and then a contra to that, or anti-woo poetics, the adherence to a single meaning in one symbol, and then a flowering and ricochet and contrarianism to occur on the symbol, on the word. And I believe it's that ricocheting that allows for the psychosis, as opposed to saying an intrusion of reality causes the psychosis. I think it's just the reverse. Yeah, to see oneself as strictly symbolic, which is interesting because Zombie Picture Show says, he quotes Wittgenstein in saying, we are facts, not things, or the world is made up of facts, not things. But when he says facts, I start to think of kind of a two-dimensionality or a symbolic realm, that the world is strictly made up of a symbolic realm. But this seems like an epistemological argument where epistemology and ontology rub each other in a weird way. But you can keep adding. I keep getting this big fish guy showing up. I enjoy it. Let's kind of see what he adds. Yeah, in a way, you've helped me guide a description into psychosis, because I keep talking about breaches, how there needs to be breaches in one's psychology through contrarian thought, instead of talking about symbols' relationship to the real, the quote-unquote real, the ground, whatever the paradigm is that defines us as living in the ground. And it's interesting to think of autistic kids living in, quote-unquote, the same reality. You would say they're living in the same, but they're autistic. Their symbolic realm and their memory realms and how they're dealing with symbolism affect their very relationship with reality too, on a core level. And so I don't know, which would upset their inclusion in the community of people agreeing on how to most appropriately use and call real, or what is real. The real, to Lacan, is constituted and beyond the imaginary and symbolic part. Right. But that's why I bring up the not the dyslexic, but the God, I was just saying it. Have I had that much caffeine in my system that I can say something and within seconds forget about it again? I mean, hence the nature of trying to multitask, the autistic. I did mention no explode. Yes, I have no explode. I'm adding that with my coffee regimen. And I did talk to a physician about it who said, it's just more caffeine in the system. You're okay using it. Just, keep everything in moderation. And I just hope I'm not breaching the moderation part. But that even the term moderation and this groundedness of realness, there's a required baseline that is assumed to be what it is we call reality, and it's normally what is tested by science, and it's what's agreed on as normative. Um, so yeah, yeah, interesting. I mean, I don't normally disagree with the normative base, but if you talk to psychotic individuals or you just get amongst groups of eccentrics, you'll find that their notion of what is grounded and what is real is a rupture between the symbolic on horizon lines of what is considered normative realness. When you see that, you're amongst it, you can be driven to a bit of craziness yourself. You might leap from whatever the basis is that you believe, the paradigm that holds together the quote unquote real, and leap into a ricochet of the symbolic, separating the self from the self, and and find turmoil there, but also find avenues of introspection and avenues of, yeah, I don't know, newly found creativity. And yes, caffeine is a hell of a drug. Oh, see, that's great. Now, I personally have been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and yet I maintain my maintenance. I like to think of the book Motor Art of the Motorcycle Maintenance Art, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I think it's called. Strictly for the name. The narrative of the book was great too. I mean, the content of the book, but just the idea of maintaining a motorcycle is the same thing as trying to maintain normative structures of reality in your mind, so that you don't fall into a lunacy just off the cuff. But schizoaffective disorder allows you to move into other realms very, very quickly. Oh, this isn't going to work. I need to pre-sketch this one. Yeah, a lot of people tend to read it, and it's just, it's got a nice storyline, and it moves really slowly, and he brings up a ghost of Faradis, trying to bring up kind of this third party, which is like a ghost of the symbolic, a ghost of meaning. But see, the reason I'm theistic is because I believe that whatever the peripheral symbolic meanings that one might have don't only actually re-relate and point back to the house of language, the house of meaning, but there is an external agency that is greater and beyond us. And I have experienced what I call a personal evidencing of that externality. And it's granting otherness to things other than our regular language speakers. It's granting an agency to and saying that our language is also always pointing outward as much as it's pointing inward to a higher intelligence which bounds us and unbinds us. But nevertheless, I say that it is the case, and it is happening, and it is real. And Palestine. Unfacial nature of man's life that can't be totalized or redoubled. Interesting. Oh, unifacial. Right when you were saying that, I was thinking about defacement, unifacial, and immediately I saw faced, and any suffix on faced, I think of um, of defacing. but it's interesting to call unifacing. See, the way you're approaching this is contra to the way I approached it, because I would talk about a defacing nature of man's life that cannot be totalized or redoubled. Yet you used unifacial. So it's as if you're finding a singularity of the face, and perhaps it's because your vision of yourself might be more robust and outlined in a greater outlining, self-outlining than I'm currently in. But then again, my smoking and my drinking has kind of pointed the arrows of things inwardly, as to try to entrap and capsulize symbols and put them in a placement, as opposed to allowing a freedom for them to go up. I mean, for example, I put a top spinning in hell, a pentagram, a hexagram, a merkaba, a hyperbola through an hourglass. They are all as symbols in hell, when these could very well be freely associated symbols that I could be using in heaven. But in my heavenly depiction, I want something much more freeing. I want it kind of a lightness of being, not a convolution of being, not a maneuverability through symbolism. Um, Unifacial, one-sided, right. But defacement, I use that not as a one-sidedness, but as kind of putting an absence, more about presence versus absence. You're absenting your face. And so the nature of man's life that can't be totalized or redoubled would be kind of an absenting of the face, because as soon as you have the face, you can redouble it. Something like that. As soon as you have a one-sided, but I see what you're saying. A one-faced, you can't redouble a singular face. It's mirror free. It cannot be totalized. And then I fall into Derrida's description of the total, that the totality of a thing, a being, an entity. I extrapolate being, entity, when in fact he might just be referring to a word. The totality of a word's meaning is found outside of the word. But when I think about replacing myself as a symbol, thinking of oneself as symbolic, as but a fact amongst other language speakers in kind of a ghostly two-dimensional rising, as opposed to an organic guts feeling about things. That's what I want to draw. When I think about it that way, let's see, now I'm skipping topics. When I think about it that way, this symbolizing the self and the totality of being, when it refers to the individual, then that really allows me more to kick into a theos, which would be the totality of my being is found outside of my being. But to the atheist, this might just mean the community of language speakers. The totality of my being is found in my organic environment, as well as other language speakers, symbolically. But when you and I speak of the theos, or an outside agency, then the totality of my being goes symbolically not just into the language, not just into the community of other language speakers, but into a realm of otherly meaningfulness that has ricochet and reflection and meaning to intelligences outside of just the human community. It's as if these intelligences understand fully our language. They encapsulate our language. They encapsulate our organics. They encapsulate everything about our being. And there's still more. to get vision and insight into that is that's the huge leap that I ask the atheist to attempt to do, is allow themselves to imagine agency that goes beyond the community of language speakers, allow symbolism to have meaning which goes beyond, because the meaning, the neurons, if you say meaning is found atomistically, like a lot of atheists will do a reductionary argument to saying, well, our thoughts and our imagination are just photons affecting chemicals in the brain which conjure these images as kind of a holistic totality of the brain. And yet, if you say that and you think of quantum mechanics, that if this photon moves here, then an equal and opposite photon is moving in someplace else in the universe at the same time. If you buy that and believe that, then, excuse me, I got a phone call. Uh-oh, a phone call I can't take because she doesn't like to be recorded. So I'll have to call her back. Oh, wait, I have to. Ooh, she wanted to come over. Damn, what am I thinking? What am I doing? I have to text her real quick. Let's see. Before I text her, let me read what you're writing. A kind of entropy of meaning or an irreversible process of language that does not return to the recursive function of language. Right, exactly. Because and that's why finding Everett, the linguist who was also a priest of some sort, a missionary of some sort, found the Piraha tribe and discovered their language, learned their language, and found that they do not have a recursive function in their language. And so what of these people's imagination, what of these people's community of non-recursive language speaking? And that is crucial to allowing oneself to breach the confines of believing that all language is recursive simply because you believe that all language is recursive. Simply because there's a maintenance, a motorcycle maintenance of believing one's recursivity, that community's recursivity must always go back to the community and not outward. Because what does it mean to just have an arrow pointing outward with not a receiver of the communication? But like I said, the quantum effect of one's imagination taking place in this locale must affect something in another locale. And that's why I grant agency to aliens. That's why I don't separate my being. Because my nerve endings are limited to one area, doesn't mean that my presence on this internet is not, I mean, I'm moving electronically to meet you and vice versa, which is channeled, but there, just because we have Gilia wrapping around our neurons, or Gaia, what is that called? Gilia, Gaia, whatever the fatty tissue is that goes around neurons, like channeling, like channeling wires in a computer, or limiting, delimiting wires, or not delimiting, but limiting wires around and about plastic. Quantum mechanics appears to have some connective possibility to something otherly that is so fantastic. But that's why I believe in aliens. That's why I believe not only in aliens in terms of a possibility, but I believe in them as an active participant, actually, that they're actually occurring. They're actually involved in our activities, which makes me sound to most people, because I'm at this point traversing the limits of rational discourse, at that very limit, that I run into Did I run into problems? I may have to cut this short because if my friend comes over, she is not going to want to be recorded. But I want to invite her over because I told her she could. If you want, if you would like, would. It auto-corrected the word would to poo. If you would like. Okay, let's see. Let's see what that does. Oh, Chicken well. I I like your additive there. Yeah. Okay. Where am I with that? I run into the exact same complex of am I reducing monotheism to polytheism? And I'm like, no, not necessarily. I mean, I was polytheistic for probably the last year, but then on December 15th, I became monotheistic in that I felt subject to an exacting singularity of determination of my soul, like a placement of my soul that I was describing along the lines of all of the ricochets and angles, all of the acute angle points, the nodes where the angles occur. Um, these are all memories in one's life that are built in a particular fashion, and and the outer ring, the most outer ring is red and yellow. It's not necessarily fire, but it's not fire-like. And there's just a high ricochet of memories that formulate a geometry that would normally appear to be outside of one's being. Kind of if you're that close to it, you might have a sense of self that appears to go infinitely, but as you back out in this drawing, it's all encompassed as a singularity, a single sun, if you will, the internal ricochets of a sun. And I wondered whether or not one's burning soul, if, so to speak, the idea of if you go to hell, and you're not fleshly, but you're symbolically ricocheting through your life's experience in an afterlife at very high speeds, then in a way I sat there and I thought it's what is meant by becoming a star, becoming a sun, that one's afterlife in hell would be the same thing as being cast into outer darkness, but being a brilliant burning star, that you get to burn in God's heavens for eternity as a star. You become Ra, you become Ra, the sun god yourself, over your own planetary systems, and you are also dark matter. You're light matter, you're dark matter. You're not just the sun in here, you're the background, you're the landscape, you're the sky, you're the atmosphere. You're all of these things. And it's just so weird. And it makes me think of 2001: A Space Odyssey, of birthing into the cosmos as a large embryo that's connected, subject and not subject. But I was saying about polytheism that I had, it felt as if there were teams of voices and cacophonies of alien activity of all different dimensions and spheres and meaning that all correlated together in my mind. They were playing with my mind. It was like football teams of beings. Say, I just heard a creak on the roof and I want to grant it agency. Like it sounded like footsteps on the roof. It sounded like something landing right there. So I can't separate myself from you guys.
I just know that you don't see me as transparent, but I believe that I am a transparent being. I don't want to kick into a psychotic mode just because I have a few guests on here and so forth. I'm big into fire and hell, but I'm a Sagittarius. See, I'm a Sagittarius also, which is a fire sign. So you got the horse sign, you got the arrows, you got the fire sign, but I'm also, I fall into the 13th sign, which is Ophiuchus, which is the snake bear that has a hollow heart, a collapsing into an absence, into a space. And this is supposedly where most physicians are born in the Ophiuchus area, but who knows? Oh, I'm glad you think it is. Yeah, I'm recording it. It should show up on YouTube. I've got 50 minutes so far. Yeah, I've been fleeing from redness and fire tones, but hey, it's time for a cigarette right now. So you guys talk amongst yourself. Good old making for a big fish. I'm going to turn the camera around so you guys can see where I am. At my door right there. And I will take the recording along with me. I was born on the 10th of December. And she was born on the 13th. And when were you born if you're a Sagittarius? Were you a November baby or were you a December? Because 13th, I believe, is Ophiuchus. I'll only see if you type fast enough, otherwise I gotta come back. Man boobs are also Sagittarius. Nope. Yep. I don't always smoke, but like I said, I'm trying to get into dark symbolism, fire, and not deny it, even though I'm absolutely petrified of this notion of going to hell. And yet I've had a sincere sensation that I was destined to that area. But partially part of what I'm doing with this painting is doing an atoning or a redemptive process. But I can't escape my history with fire signs and symbols. Identifying with the clown. The neighbors. So anyway, I guess I'm going on an hour. I probably shouldn't go on too extra long. I just love listening to it, but it's such a foreign tongue. I don't speak any Spanish. Couldn't formulate a sentence properly. It's weird. I just got a kitty not too long ago, and I like to play with it, but it really likes to scratch. But since I burned cigarettes out in my hand, the scratches were nothing. But it was this notion of cat scratch fever that was what's really, like, I wanted to know what that was, to get cat bacteria and saliva into my bloodstream through scratches, to really bond with my kitty in that respect. I don't know. It's all absurd. Quite a bit of my behavior is obscene. But the whole world is transitioning. Culture is opening up and transitioning in such a huge fashion due to the internet. I'm curious, Kronos, of what you think of the internet as a mechanism for alien world involvement. Alien world involvement, or world, like, it's such an alien type of technology. We're on this front of communication that is unlike anything humanity's ever known. And so there's going to be huge melting pots and subsects and possibilities and capabilities of witnessing one another, caring for one another, helping one another, interacting. And I'm wondering whether or not the whole capitalistic modality of being is going to fall, and whether or not Obama, with this welfare state, is actually trying to move us in, whether or not the New World Order is not only a positive thing but a necessary thing, and whether or not the internet necessarily, even though we break up, Yahoo and Facebook on national boundaries, pretty soon language should be, we'll all have Babelfish in our ear, and language should be no more of a boundary, and the internet hopefully will open up. And yet I think the powers that be are trying to keep us apart from one another so they can keep nationalistic controls that can compartmentalize things historically. Interesting. Goods and services. Well, I don't want to smoke to my death. And this is ultimately considered a bad behavior. Even though I did go to a physician, and they're like, well, you're not showing any outward signs of cancer, so we don't really think we need to look inside of your body through x-rays to see whether or not there are cancers there. You just happen to be a smoker. Your body is allowing these chemical intrusions, and it's dealing with them just fine, is my paraphrase of what they were saying. Certainly they were not saying that, certainly. Excuse me. And I'm reading, some say we get computer chips from aliens along with other tech like Teflon, but the internet is probably the most significant intention politically since the printing press. The television wasn't much for politics. Oh, I think the television was amazing for politics. But I see what you mean also. What were you saying here? But the internet was probably the most significant intention politically since the printing press. The television wasn't much for politics. Oh, invention, significant invention. Yeah, sure. Brute instrument of organization. So, interesting. Okay, going to continue trying. I think my little smoking break there scared away a few people. Wasn't being as interactive as they would have liked. I wonder. Yeah, you're right. It is hard to control, but there are obviously means of control. And the means of control are growing as well as the liberties almost at the same time, it would seem. The medium is the message, so both television and the internet have the problems as they have outsourced face-to-face communal organizations, increased our capacity to organize. What to do with organization, though? Simply spread the word. Simply make certain that the word is out there. Is everything truly an info war? Or is there an impending World War III? Are the riots in Kiev inspirational? Are the riots in Kiev a sign of political dissent by necessity? Good old-fashioned morality and values. Most of us are short-sighted pickers of low-hanging fruit. The political is the spiritual. Yes. I like your words. I like your perspective there. And yet, things that you're mentioning are ideas that I've run across in the past. So, so tell me what you think. I should be so brave as to state what I think. Yeah, maybe you go on topics about what control means. What does it mean to control? What does it mean to control spiritually? Nothing is going to change the world. Perhaps my very absence will change the world, and that I will no longer be forced to experience it. I have no answers, only problems. Well, no, but you are the universe. You are birthed into the universe. You are part of the universe. Your absence would make the universe incomplete, or as complete as it will be, meaning you witness other people's deaths, but the individual, what is it, what does, it was funny earlier, you and I were chatting here about the symbolic pointing outwardly beyond the mind of the low-hanging fruit people, picking at low-hanging fruit, and yet I do not know, I do not have an idea of what it means to absence myself without abiding by whatever it is I consider, other people dying. My considerations of other people dying informs my view of what absenting myself would be like. Yet I besides sleeping and having an absenting of self, that's the single biggest metaphor of death, is sleeping, the big sleep. By absenting, I mean political absent. I don't believe one can be totally absent. Take voting. Some say don't vote, and that is a kind of articulation of presence via one's absence. Right, okay. Okay, politically speaking. No comment. No comment just yet. Absenting. Wow. Voting. Yes. Hey man, I'm trying to draw here, man. I struggle with the ability to stay sane and survive, and also the ideals of action and revolution and all that responsibility. Sorry, disregard the posting effects. No. I struggle with the ability to stay sane and survive, and also the ideals of action and revolution. Yeah, there are general comforts and relationships of comfort that allow us to become sane again after a sense of insanity. I struggle with that as well. It's so weird to think that insanity is, a psycho-spiritual process that has, I believe, more to do with one's relationship to the symbolic realms than than merely, medical, physical, psychiatric attempts at controlling one's symbolic natures, one's symbolic relationship to the world. All I can do is what I will do in my small sphere, and hope, dream, and wish have a positive effect to some end of my intention globally. Yeah, on my most insane recovery was a recognition that my very thoughts do reflect in the universe. That if you start a project and you aim to do something with that project, that the universe will respond in some fashion to what it is you do. It's as if when I behave, it's kind of like I'm, a man in black, and the most informative thing is to just pick up a newspaper, some tabloid, and read the cover, and that the cover informs you of what's going on in the world, but it's also informing you of what your thoughts are. It's informing you of what's going on outside of the day-to-day muggle universe. The low-hanging fruit, the universe of those who pick low-hanging fruit. What is a pregnant satyr with a Hathor head hold in her right hand. She holds a trident in her left hand. Yeah, it's weird. Whatever I draw, I'm going to have to repaint over at least 2 more times, probably 3 more times. That's why this is going to be a very long, convoluted piece. I don't know. I have a positive effect in some end of my intention globally. Right, your intention globally, but more than just intent, you actually, it's kind of like saying, well, I don't want to deny the physicality of psychiatry affecting the chemicals in my being because it is part of my spiritual universe as well. So more so than intent, but actual behavior, in a way, magical behavior, what it is you do plays a role globally, politically, but you have to do something as opposed to simply intend. Intending, it's almost like intent remains intent, whether or not it's a spiritual realm or a quasi-political realm. But behavior somehow plays a role outward as well. But I'm not denying intent is playing a role. I shouldn't be denying intent is playing a role. What would you say to a Derridian notion of the irritability discovered via insanity of one's language that is both the inside and outside of meaning? What Lacan might call language as the unconscious. I say the Derridian notion of the irritability, the speaking to iterate, iteratability, discovered via insanity of one's language that is both inside and outside of meaning. What would I say to it, to the Derridian notion of it, besides what? That it also is the case, that it is both inside and outside of what one would normally comprehend as meaning. I think that's the line between spirituality, magical thinking, and rational, grounded, normative behaviors of thought is what I think. What do you think? Excuse me, guys. What the hell was that? Can't tell what that was, but some firing going on, internal combustion engine shooting, some misfire in a car, sound like a gunshot. I better end the video right now. I might start up a new one depending on how much I'm drawing and talking, but I think I'll end the YouTube video. Of course, I'll keep the chat room going. So, thanks everybody for liking my mohawk, and for listening, and for caring, and for thinking and imagining.